meeting is being recorded.
Ka tira kia ora tātou, āta Māori e hoki ki a kōtou, tai atu ki te whānau, e mātakitaki mai ana I tēnei hōtaka I tēnei rā. So a big huge welcome, welcome back to everybody. I know we've all had a good Easter so far. So yeah, just the general big welcome back to everybody, and we are in our fourth session now, so yeah, we're doing well, and we're so grateful to have everybody tune in when they can and listen to all the important kōrero, I guess. So today's session is Leonie's, and we'll have Matsua and Whaia ask questions, and we'll carry on with our normal online session. Kōrero, so just to open up, me tō kutara ki ai tātou. Kua muta ki ngā whakamāmi tēnei wā. Ka whakamoemiti ka oha atu ana mātou kia koe mō mātou rā e ko pia nei te waho te raiona. Nā mau e tono mai tau wā na hera kaha I te rangi hei whakatū where I tōna mānga I te kēnana I hō mai nei koe o mātou tīpuna I nā rā I nā mata. Kia tata mai rā koe hoa kia mātou I tēnei rā, hei arahi koe I a mātou I te oranga tonutanga. Hei āwhina heitia ki a mātou I roto I ngā tini pūtanga kētangi ngā tini pāheketanga o tēnei ao kororia ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmene, kia ora. Kia ora.
Cool. Kia ora everyone. Welcome back to our fourth session. As you will recall, we did a switch in terms of our kaupapa. So today we're going to interview or have a discussion with Leonie. So she's in the hot seat for this session. And I thought, Leonie, if we could start maybe with you continuing the sort of narrative that we started when Graham talked about Kaupapa Māori and then his history, if you like, of how his thoughts began and also the Kura Kaupapa Māori movement. Then I picked up the story and ran with it in terms of my involvement, and I thought this is a good opportunity for you to then pick up the thread and run with it. So if we can start there.
Okay, well, kia ora tātou. Today, tēnā koe wetini, nau I whakatuwhera tō tātou hui, me te karakia. Perenga hoki au ki te mihi atu ki te whānau taranaki I te matinga o tō tātou karaua huirangi I te rā tū rā. Me ngā taumahatanga I tēnei wā I wainga nui I te iwi. Engari he mihi nui ki te whānau pani, e noho pani ana, e noho pauri ana I raro I te kapua pauri. I tēnei wā tōne mā te wā ka hui tātou. Kia whakanui I tō karaua I tō tātou karaua. Nō reira huirangi moi mai rā. So, yeah, I just wanted to firstly really acknowledge the passing of Huirangi and my kiripuru and his whānau in terms of what they've, really had to go through in the past week. In terms of being in COVID-19, being in this rāhui period of not being able to hold a tangihana for him at this time, and for the whole motu really, in terms of the loss. And I guess if we're talking about Kaupapa Māori and Kura Kaupapa Māori and Kohanga Reo, you know, just track back to that work that was done in the Te Reo Māori space more generally, and from the Māori language petition with Hana, and all of you that were involved in the Māori language petition from Te Reo Māori Society, Ngā Tamatoa, and you know, the impact that that had moving into Ngā Kai Whakapūmau Te Reo Māori taking the claim into the tribunal that Huirangi led, but alongside a very strong group of Reo Māori advocates, and a very strong group of Māori people who didn't have Te Reo Māori in their lives, who Te Reo Māori was a second language, or you know, had been denied that through the schooling experience that Graham talked about earlier. And so I think really starting with that point, for me, I guess, is a good place to start, because it puts us with those people of Taranaki, both Hana and Huirangi and others, who have continued you know, that movement for Te Reo Māori and the validation and legitimation of Te Reo Māori. So all of those involved in the claim and the tribunal process, you know, that really laid a platform, which you all did, Linda, Graham, you know, as part of Ngā Tamatoa and others, laid a platform for us to even begin talking about kohanga, to even begin looking at alternatives and interventions within education that would create entirely new structures that really have formed, you know, the tuapapa, the foundation for kaupapa Māori theory, kaupapa Māori more generally across all of the sectors, because really there's not anywhere we can go now in Te Ao Māori in terms of the sectors, justice, corrections, health, education, where we don't see people advocating, asserting and implementing kaupapa Māori approaches in those areas. So, and having come from Taranaki and the experience that we had there, and our whānau had in terms of not having access to Te Reo Māori, the movement out of that for me was quite a significant one. When I was fortunate to come to move to Tāmaki Makaurau, and to meet some very strong activists in that time, and very strong people standing for tino rangatiratanga, and particularly you know, Joe Hawke and Rennie Hawke, Sharon Hawke, the Hawke whānau. And I asked you that question, you know, at the very beginning in the first session about you moving into the School of Education at the University of Education, and my first interaction with the two of you in that basement office in the education department, and really coming from a pretty kind of green background, not really having had knowledge. I mean, we lived in Waitara and never went to Parihaka, so that tells us about the kind of history that we weren't being taught in our own regions. But definitely from 1985 on, my experience of life changed dramatically, and entering into that first stage 3 Kura Māori policy paper, Kaupapa Māori policy paper, with the two of you of the University of Auckland, really opened my eyes to how things had been really denied, I think, in terms of the knowledge that we had. And it's kind of like, you know, people talk about those moments where things just change and everything falls into place. I think that was one of those moments where getting an understanding of my own education, getting an understanding of the history of my own people, everything else just fell into place. And it's a kind of conscientizing that you get, that you really can't look back. You can't open that door and then shut it and not go through it. So really that founded the way in which I then raised my children. Beginning with initially my two eldest twins, Kūmero and Te Aho Te Rangi, were in Kohanga Reo. We were in a number of Kohanga Reo, but the key ones we had experience in was at Awhiranga at the college, and then at Litimana at Richmond Road School. And there are very strong people that were involved in both of those Kohanga Reo, very strong educationists in Awhiranga with Nene Maraea Akuhata, and then again at Ritemana with Kaurangi Apiata. And that was the kohanga reo that was founded by Waiora Port and Honika had opened that kohanga. So all the way through, people that began in the movement began to spread it out, and we were beneficiaries of that. I was a beneficiary of that, and our whānau was a beneficiary of that. So, but we learned very early on that Kaupapa Māori didn't come easily, and that if you wanted schooling options, you had to really push for those options for our tamariki to have access to. And in the inner city, Maungawhau was the only kura, and we were looking to develop a second option. And so we were fortunate to work with Juana Pearson at Newton Central School, and in 1996 moved into the bilingual unit. In 1997, I think, we established Turu Karaka, which was an immersion unit. Then moving into intermediate level, we again had the same option. I think a lot of whānau in that time, in the 80s and 90s, our kohanga had been established through small numbers of kura kaupapa Māori, and so you had to be creative with your options if you couldn't access a kura. And so we then moved to establish the immersion unit at Kōwhai Intermediate, which Linda, your whanaunga Melissa Hunia was the first kaiako in that immersion unit, and it was taken over with people like Stephanie Tuffer, Joey Rogers, who then have continued that immersion unit as a pathway. And what that development enabled us to see was, you know, that there are multiple pathways that could be created, but they took a lot of work. And then fortunately for us, the boys were then accepted into the wharikura at Hōni Waititi. I guess the one thing about my first experience in wharikura, after having been in immersion units in mainstream schools and establishing immersion units, was the first, you know, kind of critical change, I think, that happened for me in understanding the difference between a Rumaki unit and a kura kaupapa Māori, was sitting at the first dress rehearsal for the kapahaka, for the performance group, for the wharikura, and watching the kapahaka do their performance, and an entire school of like 300 children stand up and do a haka to them. No adult told them to do it. They just got up and did it of their own accord. And I remember thinking, there's nowhere else you would get that. You never get that in immersion. You know, no matter what you do in an immersion context in a mainstream school, the capacity for our children from babies, 4 or 5 years old, to stand to acknowledge their tuakana, their elder siblings in their kura. I thought, this is why we're here. This is why we've made this choice. This is the pathway embedded in kura kaupapa Māori that we want for our children. And so really I think that experience was probably quite instrumental for me in knowing that actually there's no other pathway really. And alongside being a student in the Māori education group, bringing the theory to that kind of practical hands-on understanding of developing those units, and the hands-on being a whānau member and being in a kura, the theory alongside it enabled me to get a much deeper understanding of not only the cultural renaissance that was happening, but the decolonising tools that were at play, and the structural changes that were a part of being in that movement. So pretty much from you know, the early 1990s, I've never really seen any other theory pathway for me than Kaupapa Māori theory. It's been the only theoretical pathway. You know, I really do, you know, have to acknowledge you both and that development for many, many students. I acknowledge, you know, Graham throwing me into lecture in his Kaupapa Māori policy class early in the 90s, and I'm standing in front of Hone Khan and Carl Williams and Tom Williams and Heather Johns and Horeata Pohatu and Taina Pohatu, and seriously, my knees were knocking. I was so nervous. But what I realized with all of those people in that group, all of those people that were involved in that movement, they had come in with beds often already, come in to do that kind of that MEd level work, to be able to really take over a whole range of other layers in the education system, was that we were all in it together. We were all in it together. We were all there to share what we knew, and to be a part of something much bigger than any individual in that room. So really, I guess most people would know, who know me, Kaupapa Māori theory is what I do. That's the framework I use all of the time. Mana wahine theory as an extension of Kaupapa Māori theory, because I think it is an extension of Kaupapa Māori theory. It is very grounded in Kaupapa Māori theory. It is a Kaupapa Māori theory. And alongside that, having been informed by the kind of critical analysis and structural analysis of things like critical theory in the broader sense, but the foundation is being Māori. The foundation is Kaupapa Māori.
So I just want to go back a little bit. Remember in the first session, Graham talked about the ringa raupā, the blisters on your hand kind of idea, this, which I would kind of reframe as this practice theory praxis intersection, you know, and for you were studying and you were helping organise Rumaki units and being a mama and being a student and thinking about these things. To what extent do you think that sort of practice really informed your theory?
Well, I've always felt that if you don't live Kaupapa Māori, you can't write Kaupapa Māori theory. I mean, that's always been, I think that it's embedded in the theoretical framework itself, that actually it's in the doing of it. If I go back to Graham's, kind of cycle of praxis, where we are in the application of it, we're in the practice of it, we're in the reflection of it, we're in the theorizing of what we're doing, we're re-reflecting, and then we're going back to the practice. So the applied, for me, they all happen simultaneously. They gave me different understandings. And, so when I think about Kaupapa Māori theory now, I'm more inclined to think about it within my own experience and my own lived experience of how I do it. I've seen many articulations of Kaupapa Māori theory. Many of them are amazing. Many of them are not grounded in the praxis, are not grounded in the application or the practice. And so, I think that you can see how that becomes problematic. So particularly within something like say a PhD thesis or a master's thesis, where people think Kaupapa Māori theory is just another chapter in your thesis. Well, it's actually not. That's not what it is. It's about living it and understanding it and being able to actually be a part of a movement that it is. So the notion, of the ngaropa, having blisters on your hands, doing the work, I don't think you can really come to understand some of these concepts if you're not actually doing the work. And that even when you are doing the work and you re-reflect on those things, new understandings come with that. And definitely in this time with the rahui of COVID-19, a whole range of new understandings have come, I think, for many people around how tikanga is played out, how we do things, how we talk about it. I've been watching the Kōrero with Shay Wilson, Paraone, Gloin, Rangi Mātamua and Pānia Papa. And they've been having wānanga, deeply embedded discussions and thinking around particular concepts of Māori concepts or practices. And it's become more and more clear to me that when we think about it in a particular context, that tikanga is very contextualised, and that your dad, Hirani Mokumed, he writes about that within. When we think about tikanga, there is a flexibility and a context to that, to doing what is tika. So, not only I think our own live experiences, but hearing other people reflect on it is really important to reshape and rethink around how we may apply these concepts as a theory. But I think one of the things that, I know, Graham, you've talked about this a lot, is that we don't do theory for theory's sake. Kaupapa Māori theory is in itself about an applied practice. So how do we bring this to actually be transformative? Because that's the ultimate outcome or intention of even just the principle of tino rangatiratanga. That principle itself demands us to be transformative. And I use terms like that, which I don't think Graham necessarily uses, but I say that it demands us to do it. It requires us to do it. And I think it does.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the strengths you brought when you were a student is you had, I mean, every student brings something unique in terms of a skill set, and one of your skill sets was you were unafraid of new technology, but also the use of film as a mode. And I guess what I'd like you to talk about is a way to which Kaupapa Māori can be applied and through all these different media. And, so people don't have to simply reproduce what we did, because that's not possible anymore. But there are different forms and modes and challenges now that, say, a student starting off can enter. And I guess if you want to talk about the film work that you did, because I thought that was really innovative. And it's, in its time, and probably now we still need those kind of creative practice productions and outputs and processes.
I mean, I've been always really fortunate to have been surrounded by really creative people, like innovative, creative artists, weavers, filmmakers. And that, they kind of started initially in my early work, working with people like Sharon Hawke, Whetu Whala, and others in terms of the film industry, and feeling like, the technology itself is a tool. So I guess what I see technology as a tool. It's merely a vehicle for doing something, and once we unpick how to use that tool, then applying Kaupapa Māori to it is very straightforward. So Kaupapa Māori approaches for me never change. Like it's and I'm not saying it's not flexible and adaptable. I'm just saying the fundamentals don't change for me. The fundamental principles and values that are Kaupapa Māori will always be embedded in those six principles that Graham talked about, with some expansion on those. So I've always kind of seen the theory and the approach as being applicable to anything and everything. And so in the film context, we would talk about, I remember talking with Whetu Whala about Kaupapa Māori, about Māori filmmaking. And there was a whole period where there was this huge debate around what constitutes a Māori film. And early Māori filmmakers that we know of, like Merata, Barry Barclay, they were very clear about what constituted a Māori film. And it was about tino rangatiratanga, it was about Māori control over Māori stories. So that was a fundamental essence of it. And then having a discussion once with Whetu around what then constitutes a kaupapa Māori film. And for me, it was, a Māori story, Māori film, Māori controlled, but done in a Māori way. Created in a Māori way, in line with tikanga. Because a lot of films could be still created in a very Pākehā process. And so it seemed to me to be very straightforward. So then I was fortunate to begin making some short films with Glenys Paraha, and Sharon and others. Started with short films, did a few documentaries, thought about what are the stories we want to tell. I'd also done some critique and done some teaching of media from a Kaupapa Māori base in the Māori Ed team. and seeing that actually all of these principles are applied, are applicable to how you create a story, how you think about a story, how you tell a story, how you prioritize a story. So it's a bit like those Apple questions, those questions, Graham, that you would raise all the time. Who controls it? Who benefits? What knowledge is being shared? Asking all those fundamental questions. Is it a Māori story? Is it a pūrākau? Is it a traditional Māori story? Is it a contemporary Māori story? And who's in control of it? So film, I loved making documentaries. I'd love to make more in time because it enabled us to tell a story in a particular way. So one was Te Taonga Tokunako around Māori childbearing. And the last one we did was on the birthday of Te Upoko Tika, which is one we want to share online because there's a strong interview in there from Huirangi around the development of Māori radio. I've been on the Māori TV board, Te Māngai Pāho, the Māori Broadcast Funding Agency, because I have a belief that that is a forum through which we can control and tell our stories in a Māori way. And I think that's continued for Māori TV. I think there have been a few slips along the way. I think we need to revisit some of the kaupapa that is shown on the channel itself, but the fact we have the channel, I think, remains a Kaupapa Māori initiative. In terms of other social media, I just take the same approach. We need to have multiple ways of sharing our information, multiple ways of telling our story, and so, let's try them all. Let's try a bit of blogging, let's try a bit of video, let's share information as much as we can. I think early on that was the case. The Kia Mōhio Kia Marama books, Linda, that came out and that we've just re-scanned and we'll put at the end of this video, were a really early version of a graphic novel before anyone said there was a graphic novel. And they really shared a story in a particular way that made it more accessible. I think it's about making things accessible to our people.
The other thing I'm reminded about, because you're really fast at turning things over as well, is I think it was the fisheries case, but the ability to bring together monographs that we used to do. I don't know how we produced them. I can't write that fast anymore, but it was, there's an issue, let's do this, and next minute 2 staples come out and we've got a book to share with people about the court case that was happening next door, so I think you've got this capacity to kind of see the issue and then kind of mobilize people to do the work and then boom, produce something really quickly. So that role you have as a producer, director is quite an important other sideline. But I think it's critical to your praxis.
Well, I think that was the basis of Rumi, really. Like Rumi really was, I saw a key part in Rumi was the development of literature for a literature base. And I remember, us having these conversations around the monographing of every single master's thesis. Remember that?
Yeah.
Graham, you were really adamant. Every thesis that comes through should be monographed straight away so that it has, an ISBN number and it's in the library. So it's a legitimate source of referencing, right? So we kind of created, in that context, our own field of literature because no one else was going to create it. We had to create it for ourselves. So I think those were things that were really about get the information out, give students like myself at that time something to be able to reference. I think, Graham, you've referenced probably every thesis that was available at the time when you wrote your PhD. And that's a conscious, intentional act of creating literature that began in Rumi and that we followed over into IRI, the International Research Institute, to continue doing that. And the monographs were, I think that was your idea, Graham? Because I remember you giving a title. Economics, politics, and the politics of colonization or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, there was the politics, colonization, or economics, politics, colonization, that series. there were the thesis series. I think that commodifying fisheries and the commodification of iwi was part of that series. But they were rapidly produced.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was about conscientising our communities around key issues that were relevant, that we felt we needed to get the information out. And I think those early issues which you sort of edited were really great in doing that. And we had some really good contributors that were from our students, inside and outside. So a really important piece of work. But, I think, Leonie, that just jumping ahead a little bit, but picking up on the theme that we're exploring, is that one of your great contributions, I think, for all of us, has been your role as a public intellectual. And the essence of being a public intellectual is, in my view, taking that individual consciousness that we've developed ourselves and bridging the gap to a community consciousness. How do we create community consciousness from our own individual? And I think that's really more than most of us. You've actually been out there doing that stuff, often requiring a lot of courage and so on. But
how long's your neck? Like because you put your head and your neck right out there. It's like, yeah. Yeah,
but I think that in talking to students through this broadcast, that what's your advice to students in that responsibility of moving from individual? It's all very well us becoming conscientised as an individual, but how do we take our whānau? How do we take our communities forward with that as well?
Well, I think that was the intention of those kind of publications we're talking about, and the films that we're talking about, was around providing mechanisms and pathways for sharing information, for people to become more deeply aware of things that were happening. We're seeing a lot of that happening at the moment, particularly with that kind of wānanga series that Shay and those and that group are doing. I think that they are really doing a lot of work around, making us think more deeply about tikanga and mātauranga Māori and te reo Māori. There is something about that kind of activist movement, I think, that I was fortunate to be a part of, and seeing people constantly taking on board things. And so, I walked into that. So people like Annette Sykes, who's, been out the front for many, many years, Miriana Pittman, Wana J, Hilda and Honi Harawira, the Hawk whānau, all those whānau. And then in terms of the academics and the scholars, Hirani, Rangi Nui, Margaret Mitu, all those ones. There's just Pat Hōhapa, so many people that have been models for us, I think, in terms of, for me, particularly in terms of how we think about it. But I've also, I think, Graham, you have consistently, since the first time I met you, taken on, that advocacy of that this is not about the privatised academic. This is about the role of Māori academics in making change. And actually, Pat Hōhapa wrote something very early on, I think in the 70s or 80s, about the role of Māori academics and what our roles are and how we balance that out. I'm not sure that I'm very good at getting the balance. I think that's one thing I would say. So I'd advocate for people to think about the balance in terms of their role and their relationships and whānau and being present. But definitely, I've always seen that there are a few of us that get to the PhD level, not because we're not capable, because there are a lot of Māori that are capable, but in terms of have that kind of access to actually be able to be doing this kind of work. And so we do have a role and a contribution to make in challenging some of the things that happen to our people when there are very few people challenging. And so I think that that is a role we have. It's something that we need to take seriously. If you consider yourself to be a Māori scholar, researcher and academic, particularly if you consider yourself to be a Kaupapa Māori scholar, I don't think that we have any other choice, really. I don't think we do. I think things come up and we need to support our people who are challenging them, or we need to challenge them ourselves. And, you know, I can think of a couple of times when really, you know, there's just been a need for someone to actually come up as a backup support for other people. Yeah. I remember Kiri Opai in the early 90s using the word Holocaust after Tariana had used the word Holocaust in terms of the impact on Taranaki and the invasion in Taranaki, and immediately knowing that actually Māori scholars needed to go and back that. We needed to step up and back our people who are making those assertions and being very clear about what happened to our own whānau hapa and iwi. And so sometimes I think we don't necessarily have to be leads. I don't think that every Māori scholar needs to be a lead, but definitely if something's coming up in your area of expertise, we need to provide the backup legitimation, backup support and affirmation for those of our people who are taking the front line in terms of challenging certain things. Because I think if you remain in that space of, you know, my degree is only about me, if you remain in a space that's it's only about my benefit, which is that privatized academic space, if you remain there, I think that, you know, what you've had really, you know, access to in terms of the knowledge is not making significant impact. It's not making enough impact. So whereas there's that really fundamental, you know, raising your own children and caring for your own whānau and having income, there's that. But as a scholar, we've got an obligation, and it goes beyond the legislated obligation of being a critic and conscience of society. I mean, that's something that's in formally in the legislation, but it's actually way beyond that. I think for Māori, I think it's about really just standing up when someone needs to stand up and supporting our people when they need to be supported and providing that backup when it needs to be provided. And I just don't think we have any other option. And I think if Māori scholars think they have another option, they should really think very clearly about why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I even go so far as to say, if you're picking up your check in the institution for doing something that's a Māori, ostensibly a Māori position, then it's you know, incumbent upon you to act in particular way. So I'm really critical about the rise of what I see the privatised Māori academic institutions, who simply reproduce the institution, who are carried away, you know, developing funding streams off the back of often our community crises, to raise funds to benefit their own personal, you know, positioning inside the institution. So I think we've got, you know, and that's a critique that I think it's fair enough for us to raise of ourselves, amongst ourselves. I'm not raising this for Pākehā people to engage with this. This is an issue I think that we need to face as scholarly communities ourselves. The Māori scholarly community, we need to be effective in what we do in the claim to being a Māori scholar. So, you know, I just want to acknowledge actually your positioning around your public intellectual work, which is really taking some of these big issues to the wider domain as being really a counter-narrative to all of that stuff that's going on around privatised academic behaviour. We need more of it. I should pass back to we agreed that Linda would ask the questions. I've jumped in.
Well, there's a number of directions we could go now, but one of the ones I want to come back to is, in the end, I think Kaupapa Māori is quite a hopeful, positive kind of pathway forward in terms of You know, why would people want to move out of the status quo if you can't see, or if you don't have a kaupapa, or if you're not intentional? And, you know, so there's that whole point that by, you know, taking on board and practicing as a Kaupapa Māori researcher, you're always in the search for the Kaupapa Māori solution, or the pathway, or the next few steps, or the vision. And so I want to turn now to your research, because you've kind of taken up, I guess, one of your specialisms is working with Māori community providers. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe talk about the projects you've done and why you've chosen them, and why those providers that you've built long relationships with.
Transforming projects.
Yeah, the transforming projects.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's been quite a long time that I've worked with you, Linda, often in terms of the Kaupapa Māori research work we've done. And I think it comes back to what Graham was just saying about positionality. It comes back to positionality and how we locate ourselves, and how we've sought to really critique the kind of mainstream research approach, which is often a a researcher-initiated idea about something, where individuals identify problems, and we've had this with us, happening to us for a very long time. Non-Māori, generally, individuals identifying a Māori problem, and what just becomes more and more clear, I think, in all the work we do, is that actually we are not the problem, we are the solution. And so that's something we've begun to say more and more consistently through the work. Māori are not the problem, Māori is the solution. Whānau is not the problem, whānau is the solution. And we see that in things like whānau water being developed, but much broader than that. So I think that the first project I did in the area of domestic violence was in the early 2000s, and I really didn't want to do family violence work. It was something that I had tried to avoid. I wanted to stay in the education space in terms of te reo and schooling. And I guess this is the event that really changed a lot of my process in terms of Kaupapa Māori research. I was sitting in Iri, and I got a phone call from one of my relations, Ngāropi Cameron, who was sitting in a research hui in South Auckland with Heather Clark, and a couple of people from the University of Auckland, including Fiona Cram from Iri. And she rang up and said, where are you? And I said, I'm in my office at the university. And she said, well, the University of Auckland are here to do our evaluation, and why are you not here? And I said to her, because I don't do work in family violence. I don't research in that area. It's not my area of expertise. And she said, well, we're not signing this until you get here, so you've got 20 minutes to get to South Auckland. And that really just, for me, it was like, when your own people ask you to do something, ask you to be involved in doing something, you do it. So from that point on, I've been very active and working alongside those groups of providers. Not only Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki, but Te Puna Oranga in Christchurch, Ngā Kaitiaki Māori, which is the National Māori Counsellors for Sexual Violence. Those groups of people working alongside those providers, working on projects that are important to them, helping to source, research funds for those organisations and with those organisations. And so pretty much all of the work I've done now in the past 15 years probably has been in that vein. And as we move through a whole range of work that we do with each of the providers, there's always another question. But it's not a question that the Crown has about them, it's a question that they have of themselves. And they've always been very clear about that they do the frontline work and they don't actually have time to go and find out this other information that they want to know to help inform their work. And I know, so all of the questions that have come up in the family violence space, in the Hingangaroa, the research on Māori trauma-informed care, or healing really. So even in that trauma-informed care space, Māori providers have shifted that to a healing-informed care space. Just by doing the research work and thinking about it and having people walking with them to do that work. And so that's really been the focus of doing the mahi. And so it enables me to think about things like, and for us to think about things like co-production in a totally different way from a Western frame. It's really fundamentally whanaungatanga, and it's about being relational, it's about having strong positionality, it's about being clear about your role as a researcher alongside providers, being very clear that as a Kaupapa Māori researcher, you are there to support the research technique and the process of the research. They are the people who are knowledgeable of the field. The providers are the ones that bring the questions to the table. They also bring the answers to the table at the same time. So I think that when we're getting into thinking about Kaupapa Māori theory and research, we are doing these things for a purpose. Like there is an intent, there is a clearly defined need. I'm not saying that there can't be individual Māori looking at individual areas of expertise, because I think that there's amazing work happening. I think in the Te Reo Māori space there's incredible research happening that our people want to know. Jenny Lee Morgan has done a very good, incredible piece around Waikato Tainui and Te Reo Māori into the future. I think Rangi's work in terms of, astronomy is really important. It's an important question that our people have been asking for many, many years. So I don't think it's not that, I'm not saying that individual or groups of Māori researchers can't do things. What I'm saying is that it needs to answer questions that are important to our people. And that's the key, answering questions, asking and answering questions that are important to our people. And I think we do it in a particular way and others do it in another way. I remember being at Waikato Tainui College for Research and Development when Sarah Jane was talking about methodology, when she was then the director of the college, and her talking about within the college, it was not researcher or individual initiated projects. If you had that idea, that was not the place for you to work. The college was about the questions being raised and the issues being raised by the iwi, and that it was their role as Waikato Tainui researchers to answer the questions that the iwi wanted answered and to do the work that the iwi wanted done. So it's not just on a kind of national Māori level, I think on an iwi level and even on a hapu level, because I'm aware of the work that Cheryl is doing with Te Atawhai o Te Ao. It's very much about the questions that our hapu are asking, our iwi are asking, and otherwise sometimes it's about what Māori as a nation are asking. But we certainly can't
universities in particular don't necessarily train students to do that kind of research. They train them to do the research investigator style rather than, build their skills and then try and make themselves useful to a hapu or iwi or Māori organisation. So because a lot of graduate students are watching this webinar series, I was wondering if maybe as we're finishing, you might talk about, supervision and what you expect of doctoral students and maybe what you've learned from them as well. As I know, every doctoral student teaches us a lesson about something in life, but just your expectations about becoming a Kaupapa Māori researcher through their studies.
I think, well, I've learned a lot, particularly in the past year around PhD supervision. Because I've been fortunate to have supervised creative PhDs, and creative PhDs just come with a whole other way of thinking and doing things and being with their material, particularly the weavers working with harakeke. And so, you know, with those scholars, because they're more than students, I think most Māori PhDs are, you know, mature aged, and they really are scholars in their own right. And so they bring a whole range of ways of thinking about the interaction with their materials or with what they're doing. And often those creative arts students are working in a collective anyway. Like they are in weaving collectives and they're working collectively in the renaissance and the revitalisation of that particular form, art form, that mahi toi. So I definitely have in the past, you know, a few years learned a lot from rāranga and from kai rāranga in the work that I've been doing and the connection of harakeke to our well-being. And that's actually then informed some of the more recent work we've been doing around tiakina te pā harakeke, around whānau well-being, has been thinking about. So, I mean, I think that's very true. Everyone brings this kete of knowledge that they already have. And I think when I first started supervising, again, from the learnings I had in Māori education, it's never don't get into this depositing idea that people are not coming with already existing knowledge forms in this. Everyone comes with the kete mātauranga and they bring that into the fore, and our role is to support them to shape that in a thing called a PhD. The work that we did on Te Tātua o Kahukura, talking to PhD scholars, one of the things that came up very early in that work a few years ago was that every Māori PhD scholar had come into their programs through some kind of connection from their whānau or idea from someone around them or an idea from their work. Like the idea of being in those programs was not solely theirs. They were not there just to get a PhD. You know, they were often there because their work or their whānau had put them on a pathway to go there. And often very early in their lives too, like people would talk about, you know, a particular nanny or a particular kaiako or someone that had kind of said to them and aspire, you know, told them to aspire to something in their lives. And so when they come in, they've often come in with this question that's really pertinent, that's already grounded in their community or grounded in their whānau question. And that's what they, you know, drives the work that they do. So I think that is really informing of scholars. Like, be very clear about why you're coming into things like this and what your intention is. So I guess it comes back to always being intentional, conscious, connected, having strong relationships, knowing your position, knowing how you locate yourself, and thinking about all of those things when you come in to doing that work. I guess one of the other things that, you know, we hear a lot of from Māori students, both at MA and PhD level, is this idea of, I want to write for my people, but I have to write for the institution. You know, this kind of dilemma around who am I writing for? And that came up a lot in the work that we did for Te Tātua o Kahukura. Who am I writing for? What am I writing for? Well, on one hand, there are things that, if you want a PhD, there are things you have to do institutionally and structurally in your work. But actually, you're writing for transformation. So that's who you're writing for. You're writing for your own people. And so releasing that stress of that dilemma, I think, helps you to become more of a activist intellectual or a public intellectual, because you're not as concerned about what Pākehā academia thinks of you. Because really, I don't care what Pākehā academic thinks about Māori academics. We don't do what we do for any institution. We do what we do for our people. And so it's always coming back to, why are we doing what we're doing? Is it driven by our people? Is it useful for our people? Is it answering questions for our people? Is it providing the kind of conscientization and critical analysis that actually we need? Because hegemony is so powerful that we've integrated and embedded a whole lot of other understandings in our lives. You know, they need a bit of work on. During this time, the tangihanga kōrero that they had on the wānanga the other day, they were talking about, and it's kind of moving into the manawahine space, but talking about, you know, Māori women And the kinds of tikanga or ways of being that we have around things like going into the urupa if you're bleeding. And so those kind of tapu things. And I really do encourage people to watch those series because I think they do raise really some quite critical questions. And what the answer from Pānia Papa was, since when do fences become strong enough to hold out tapu? So why is it we can stand outside of a fence and be okay? He taiapa. So, and actually I just thought, oh my God, they totally changed a whole lot of things I was thinking about. I have a whole lot of my own explanations around critiquing that. But when you think about that as a fundamental, when I was writing the Manawahine piece, I was writing Linda, one of the examples I thought about doing was around why this persistence that Māori women have to wear a black skirt. So when I heard that response, it immediately gave me another response to the black skirt. Since when does a piece of fabric protect us from tapu? Or, so how does this work? How do we even come to thinking that that's actually a legitimate way of understanding how we might play out our tikanga? So I think, there's always things that come up that make you re-reflect in terms of praxis and how we think about things, and add another layer of thinking to the kind of analysis that we have. And I think always being open to that is really important in terms of being Māori scholars generally, but definitely Māori PhDs. I think the other thing around, which is coming back to that way that we position ourselves as scholars, is, I have seen examples of people getting PhDs and then the assumption is that they are now the expert. They are now the Māori expert. Not only that they may have that, but the world has that. And so I think being very wary and very careful of what a Western degree can give you. I know when I finished my PhD, the thing that was most evident to me when I finished my PhD was how little I knew. How little I knew. That you can reach the kind of top peak of Pākehā academic degree, but in Te Ao Māori know so very little. And so the depth of our mātauranga, the depth of our knowledge is just so incredible that we need to be very careful around getting Western degrees and thinking that they're a door opener. That's what I've always seen them. They are another tool. They're a tool like a film. They're a tool like a blog. They're a tool that we use to open doors, that we use to create space. And Kaupapa Māori theory did that. It did that in the university by putting the word theory on it. It created theoretical space immediately. A lot of people didn't like that. A lot of people have always fought against that and back at that and resisted that. But actually, that's what Kaupapa Māori theory did. It created a theoretical space. Kaupapa Māori methodology created a methodological space. Decolonising methodologies created another methodological space. So we're gradually opening these spaces up because we actually know we've been doing this for thousands of years. Theory is not new. Our people have been doing it for thousands of years. Every time we traversed the Pacific, we did it again. Every time we created a new food source, we did it again. And so when I come back to, I guess, coming back to thinking about Kaupapa Māori theory, for me, those 6 principles provide us with everything we need. And I know that we've always said not to be formulaic, and that there is some critique of if you name certain things, it becomes a tick box and it becomes formulaic. I think when you know Kaupapa Māori theory, you know it is not formulaic. You know that when we're talking about tino rangatiratanga, and we're talking about the self-determining principle, and being in more control and having more autonomy over our lives, that is not only about us, that's not about us as individuals, it's about us in collectives, in our whānau hapu iwi, in Te Ao Māori, in our community. So we can't assert tino rangatiratanga as being about an individual capacity to do everything the way they want to do it, because it's always in relationship to the collective. And the term itself, coming from Te Tiriti o Waitangi, tells us that. So the 6 principles, in my view, give us a capacity to dig down and not be formulaic. Taonga tuku iho, as you were saying, Graham, in the very first process, the kind of cultural aspirations principle is so broad you can drive a truck through it. You know, it's so broad. Te reo, tikanga, mātauranga. All of those themselves are so broad. So for someone to think that they could do a tick the box using Kaupapa Māori theory, for me, would indicate they don't really know what that is about. Kia pikiaki ngā raurirau o te kāinga, I think is one of the ones I asked you about, Graham. I think people have most problem with kind of understanding the socio-economic principle, but the other things that underpin that's actually an incredibly positive principle. That's about kia pikiaki. We're actually about uplifting, which is the opposite of being oppressed. So as a principle itself, it's a very empowering, it's a very collective principle that I think people need to come to understand more. And it's probably one of the ones that we're seeing play out most in the way in which our people are responding to COVID-19, the way in which pretty much every hapu iwi Māori organisation is out there boxing things, taking food out. My mother had two gift boxes or food packages arrive on her doorstep. My mother's Pākehā, you know, but she's raised in Māori whānau, so the iwi include her in caring for Māori people. And our people go beyond caring even just for our own. Our people are caring for many, many people, delivering packages, you know, making sure people are okay, checking in with people. I think we're really seeing that principle play out. And as it plays itself out, we're also seeing in the session of Tino Rangatiratanga of our people doing all kinds of things around the motu to protect our own. Where we may go from here, I think is an interesting, and you talked about this, Linda, you know, how we are post this period. I think it's going to be really interesting for Māori. I think the food issues has really brought food sovereignty to the fore. I think the isolation of kaumātua it's going to make us think more about whanaungatanga and papakainga again, so that kaumātua are actually within the context of collective papakainga. Even the terminology itself, Paralani Gloin talked about stopping using the word lockdown, because we're not locked down, you know, start thinking Māori nei, that we're in Wāhui. And then if we're talking about Wāhui, we have the consciousness and the capacity to create that ourselves, to be in control of that ourselves, as well as thinking about the wider community and what's happening in the wider community. I think the way in which we've thought about this as a kaupapa in terms of caring for each other has been really critical. And so it's very easy to apply all of those principles to thinking about Māori responses to COVID-19. I also think that we're seeing in the structural analysis, I think we're seeing a lot of playing out of middle class and white privilege in terms of those that believe that they have the right to flout and to break the rāhui. When you see images of people at beaches, they tend to be Pākehā people walking on the front of their beach. So, you know, the kind of endangerment principle, I think we're really aware of what something like this can do to our people after our experiences of epidemics prior to this. So I think there's a whole lot of kind of, you know, structural things playing out as well in terms of how we might think about this post the Rāhui period. So I kind of went off on that one.
No, that was good. And a good way to finish. Or maybe we should finish with the fact that I see you've been making kono, that you've been using your time in Rāhui very productively learning and doing rāranga, which is cool. So, ngā mihi kia koe, Leonie. I think that's been a good session, and just thank you, and I'll turn it over back to Wetini.
All right.
Kia ora no tātou. O tira he mihi kauana tēnei kia koe Leonie, mō Kōrero, I tēnei rā. It's offered a great insight for the many that are watching and that do watch these recordings here. O tira kia kōruatahi. Yeah, great insight into everything that happened in the basement, I guess, of MOE. And I do know that there's probably a lot more stories in Kōrero in there. But a big, huge thank you, Leonie. Kia ora wā atu ki a koe tēnei wā. Rai runga I tērā, me whakakapi hoki tā tātou nei Kōrero I tēnei rā, mai wētahi karaki a te hāhiringa tū. Kua mutua ki ngā whakamārama I tēnei wā. Whakamoemititia a ihoa e ngā tau iwi katoa, whakamoemititia e ngā iwi katoa. E nui ana hoki tāna mahi tohu ki runga I a tātou ai mauana te pono ihoa ake whakamoemititia ihoa. I te tīmatanga te kupu ko te ātua no tāua kupu I te tīmatanga nānanga mea katoa I hanga ka hore tētahi mea e kore te hango o ngā mea hange ia. Ia te ora ko te ora te māramatanga mō ngā tāngata katoa I roto I te pauri, te māramatanga e whiti ana he oi ki haimau I te pauri. Kororia ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmene. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora wetini.
Kia ora wetini.